Hi, everybody. What I'm going to talk about is a little bit different just because my experiences is what I'm going to be talking about. So this issue of smuggling isn't just something that, although I have researched on, it's something that is my lived experience, and also just the context. I'm talking about as a Mexican woman living in the United States. I'm sure if you've been following the news, it's not new, but it's pretty blatant what's going on over there. So that is my life experience. For me, I just do want to make this distinction between smuggling and trafficking. I think in my mind, trafficking does speak a little bit more towards exploitation and coercion. This was definitely not the case, and this is not what happened with me. I entered the United States when I was 5 years old on a visa, with my mother's visa, back when it was you could go as a family, overstayed the visa, was living in the US without status, 18 years. Up until when I was 18, I had to go to Mexico to do some paperwork with my mother, and what happened then was then I had no way of coming back to the United States, which in every way was my home. It's where I had grown up, and there was no way for me to get back to my family. So what we ended up having to do was hire somebody to help us across the border. We tried, actually, even thinking about this, I'm not sure how many attempts there were, just because there's a really big gap in my mind. I think that I have put on myself to not remember a lot of what happened as I was crossing the border. Just pretty much the things that people think about as crossing through the desert, going through the river. These were my experiences, something that as essentially somebody that had grown up in the United States, aside from papers, I was as American as you could be without claiming it. So I never expected this was going to be my reality, but we attempted, I believe, 5 times. 5th time was the charm. This was September 2003, so 2 years after 9/11. I actually, when we finally did make it to the US, it was September 11, 2003. So, like I said, I think that how I think about this was there was no option. We had to get back to our home, to our family. We entered into an agreement with a coyote or a smuggler, or with many of them actually, and so that meant ending up on different detention centers on both sides of the border just to get across. I did face moments where I thought, yep, I'm going to die. This is something that I need to face at 18. And it was horrifying, and I think that this conversation of victimization and criminalization, so I was reading a lot over the press releases over that Kenny and the Harper government have put up, and it's very interesting to me that we're doing this for them, like we need to save them, those poor victims, they're coerced by all these people, and then if you look at the fine print, oh yeah, but you need to be detained for a year, no hearing, or you need to wait 5 years before you can bring your family. So clearly we're just punishing the victim according to them. So there's a lot of doublespeak that I think people need to get paid more attention to. And also I saw this experience that I went through as agency. Essentially, our reality is one in which countries like the United States and Canada have made it so that there is no possible way to come so-called legally into a country. So what do? You either die, or you're separated from your family, or you do something about it. And for us, that's what it was. It was, we're not going to take this. This is messed up as can be. I might die, but it's a necessity. So to me, it was definitely agency. And I think that to understand exactly how problematic this construction of the person that's smuggled as a victim or the smuggler as this horrible person, because let me just make it clear that while I was thinking I'm going to die and I was surrounded, there were like 5 women and maybe 10 men at one point in the desert, I was weary of, okay, I'm completely outnumbered. I could be raped or killed. Nobody would ever hear me scream. It could happen. I knew who my enemy was. That was Border Patrol. There was no doubt in my mind as I saw a helicopter coming at me or as I was squished into a van like an animal, that Border Patrol was the enemy. The state was the one that had gotten me into this mess. So to understand that, I think that you need, it's a definitely different location. In the United States, the U.S.-Mexico border is a very distinct area. And what I believe that's going on there is just a spectacle. The United States needs to up the detentions, up the apprehensions and the deportations, and at the same time has a revolving door policy in catch and release, essentially, because that, I know this because I lived it. We grab you, you're caught, you're detained until the morning, fingerprinted, taken a picture of, and then you're released back on the other side of the border. Okay, then I'm just gonna keep doing it until at one point I get through. And this is on purpose. I believe it purposely facilitates what's so-called illegal immigration, because when it comes down to it, that's just cheap labor. And actually, at one point when I was detained well, I wasn't detained at this point. She hadn't detained me. I hadn't been arrested. But I was at the U.S. Embassy in Juarez, Mexico, and a lawyer who was interrogating me actually said, you know, we know where you're all at. I know where you live because she had my address and all my information. We know exactly where you're at. We're the United States government. If we wanted to, we could go after you and pick you up, but it's actually helpful to us that you're living there because we need cheap labor. I wish I had had a recording device or something. So, in what's going on now, it's the militarization of the border, right? There's no doubt that they are waging a war, a militarized war on civilian people. You have helicopters, heat sensors, night visions, upping of the troops and paramilitary law enforcement, checkpoints, detention centers, arbitrary checking, which, you know, it's really not that arbitrary because race is a marker, as we saw in Arizona. And the hypermasculinity and the patriarchy that goes on in the military that I think we're really aware. If we want to talk about women and what's going on with women and how they're harassed and raped and violated, let's talk about Border Patrol and all the cases in which police and Border Patrol are the ones that are doing this to people. Nobody talks about state violence because apparently there is violence that is acceptable and necessary, and there is violence that is unacceptable. The acceptable and necessary is the state violence. It's by Border Patrol. It means that it's okay to build fences and a wall that lead people to the desert where they're going to die. It means that there's no safe way to cross, that there's no water or access to health care if you were hurt. And it means that this abuse and violence is normalized. What's unacceptable, though, is the rapes and the beatings that do happen from coyotes, the act of smuggling, the actual smugglers, and even then, you get, and I know because I heard it often, they shouldn't have put themselves in that situation. They didn't want to get raped, they didn't want to die, they shouldn't have done it. So what we see from this is that violence is the method and the deterrent. And I think it's very obvious just how we're constructed as animals and as illegal aliens, obviously, because if you're talking about aliens, then nobody cares that you're dying. You're not a person. You're dehumanized. They're hunting, catching, packing people into vans, then releasing them. Yeah, that's what you do to animals. And as a congressman from Iowa at one point said about an electric fence, he said, we could electrify it, not enough to kill somebody, but enough to make them think twice. We do that to livestock all the time, because that's what we are. So I just think it's really important to reconceptualize why people need to be smuggled, why the smuggling market exists. You want to talk about the people that have created these jobs? How about the United States government? How about the Canadian government? These people would not be getting so much more money. I know that during the time I was crossing, we had to pay thousands of dollars simply because it was 2 years after 9/11, and after 9/11, the prices went up. So if you want to talk about this exploitation economically or otherwise, let's talk about how it's virtually impossible for racialized, gendered, or impoverished people to get into a country, so-called legally. I think that we need to start reframing how we think about these things, stop thinking of people as illegal or as aliens, I think that we need to call for a freedom of movement for all, not just refugees, but also migrants. And it's not just people that are suffering from some sort of from everything that these governments do to us, displacement, war, etc. But if I want to move just because I want to, I should be able to do that too. We need to keep organizing. We need to reject the state's definition of what a criminal is and what a criminal is not, the good immigrant versus the bad immigrant. And I just think that we need to stand up against this, and I think that this is a good start. Hopefully, we can continue the conversation. Thank you.